by Robert Kiyosaki, which is Budget Deficit of a Government, Businesses, and Individual. So today I'll be talking on the budget deficit of the government and budget deficit of a business. And on the next topic, I'll be talking about the budget deficit of the individual. So today, the budget deficit of a government, according to Barron's definition, this is accumulated by the federal government of the USA. And this must be financed by the issuance of treasury bonds or T-bonds. The US government was financing its problem by selling debt, the treasury bonds. So when you go to the stock market, you'll have mutual funds, stocks, and T-bonds. So T-bonds are issued by the government. And we, the US citizens, are, and our kids' are the future taxpayers that must pay for this. So this is Robert Kiyosaki's income expense flow, and this is the flow of the government. So the flow of the government for budget deficit, a lot of times the government has more expenses than the money coming in. And therefore, in order to solve our community's problem, it has to issue T-bonds, treasury bonds, and that becomes a liability for the US government. Third, the book talks about the Social Security Trust Fund. And according to the book, there is no longer a Social Security Trust Fund. It do not really exist. Why? I'll tell you later on. So it does not really exist because the Social Security Trust Fund has, and it's filled with T-bonds or treasury bonds. And in other words, because the USA government operates on a budget deficit, the money workers and businesses have been paying into the Social Security Fund has been used to pay other bills and not to increase the Social Security Trust Fund. So that's why I said earlier that it does not really exist, because there's no money in the coffer. There's no money in the Social Security Trust Fund because the government used the money to pay for other bills. Now we go ahead with the budget deficit of a business. So first lesson here, the budget deficit must be reduced or eliminated. How? The business has to increase the sale or reduce expenses. For many businesses, increasing income is hard. And just like with individuals too, increasing income is hard. And on the last video last week, I talked about 10 ways to increase our income. Now, cutting the expenses, increasing debt or increasing our liabilities, and selling assets would make the problem even worse. When we have budget deficit, we need to cut the expenses. Our debts go up higher, and at times we have to sell the asset. Lesson number 3, if a person can sell, he or she can increase income. So that tells me that selling is a way of life, and everybody needs to learn how to sell. Number 4, increasing income versus decreasing expenses is a way better option to solve our budget deficit. So increase our income versus decreasing expense. So why is that? When we increase our income, the sky is the limit. When we reduce our expenses, we have basic needs. We have to pay our house or our rent. We have to pay for water. We have to pay for sewer, gas. We pay for electricity. We pay for internet. We pay for food. We pay for shelter. We pay for clothing. We pay for health insurance. So there's only a certain amount that we can cut. We cannot cut down to zero. we can cut back 5 or 10,000. If we're earning 20,000, we cut back 5 or 10,000. That leaves us with 10,000. Where does the 10,000 goes? That 10,000 goes to pay for the basic necessities. But if you look at it, how high can we increase our income? Sky is the limit. We can have several drips. So instead of just reducing our expenses, increasing income, according to the book, is a better way to solve our budget deficit. Lesson number 5. If we have frivolous expenses, or the business have frivolous expenses, and how would you say? They would have lavish parties. They would have increased costs in debt. Why? Because they have jets or yachts. The businesses need to address this financially irresponsible problem first before they solve them. So they may have to sell the jet, they may have to sell the yacht, or not even when you have a business, don't even go to jet or yacht first, or not hold lavish parties when you're starting out. So hopefully you learned something. Let me know in the comment section below what your takeaway is for today's topic, budget deficit of a business and budget deficit of a government. So stay tuned for more here in the Alka and Ria show.
Thanks, Ria. That was great. You know what? I do have some comments, and it's very important that first off, when it comes to individuals, to reducing their expenses, because that's really that's the key as to how we can create the wealth. Because with most people have the habit, it's habitual. You spend, we spend, or we can overspend. But if we just go blindly, and I was guilty of this. I was guilty of just like I would spend. If I didn't need to buy something, I would just buy it. But now, learning, because you learn and you gain knowledge. Okay, what do you need to do, and how do you, when you're talking about creating wealth, well, what do you need to do? You need to cut back on expenses. Cut back. If you don't need to buy something, then just don't buy it. But then if you're on an impulse doing things, like I was on an impulse, I would just buy it for the sake of buying. Not that I needed, but that was my habit. That was my paradigm. So I really like that reducing your expenses when it comes to individuals. And of course, like governments, they always go into deficit. The Canadian government, the US government, governments, they spend, but they want the taxpayers to pay for their overspending.
That is right. And with today's financial inflationary markets, the budget deficit of a government, they would probably love it. Why? Because of the inflation, that budget deficit they have, their IOU is less, because that money, that $1 is no longer $1, right? That $1 could be 50 cents. So if the government owes, let's say, I'm just throwing out the number, $1 trillion, that $1 trillion is cut into half. So that becomes 500 billion, right? So with inflationary markets, if the government has a large sum of budget deficit or budget debt, then it cuts into half because of inflation. So now what they'll do is have more deficit, right? Because their deficit is less, from 1 trillion, now it's 500. But in reality, it's because of the inflationary market.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I think it's a great conversation. And also, like, the businesses too. Businesses, they like, once a year, Christmas time, most companies tend to throw Christmas parties, and they could be lavish parties, but they then don't realize that, okay, well, you can go into debt if you're constantly throwing lavish parties, if you're constantly traveling to meetings and you're going by the private jet that you own, the lifestyle that companies have. I mean, I think so anyway. I think so. I think that can sort of come in because I read, this is going back about 5 years ago. It was in the UK, and some companies they were actually doing this, and the taxpayers were paying towards their travel, their lifestyle, and people complained, why should we as taxpayers pay towards you're traveling by your jet, you're traveling to meetings, it's a lavish lifestyle. So that's what I feel. Taxpayers will sometimes pay towards whatever lifestyle you are having.
That's right. So it's very important for us to get educated, so we're not just wondering, right? We're improving our financial status, and the way to improve our financial status is to continuously improve our leadership, is to continuously read books on finance, on business. The only way for us to get out of this inflation is to start our business. So increase our income and start our business, and cut your frivolous expenses.
Exactly. That's the key. Cut back on your expenses and your lifestyle. Well, friends, we have come to the end of the show, and it's always just great information always that's shared, and we just hope that you are just taking so much information that's always given to you, because knowledge without implementation is just knowledge. It's just but if you take actions on what we are sharing, then that is where you are going to get the most benefit. So we have come to the end of the show, but you know what? Stay tuned for more to come